My mother ripped my national accounting certification off the wall in front of 136 guests and screamed, "You are nothing but a glorified bookkeeper for this family. Stop acting like you're special." My father didn't even look up from his scotch as he handed me a printed invoice for $1,100,000, representing every single cent he claimed they wasted raising me. He told me to pay up or never contact them again. My sister, Brianna, didn't wait for me to speak before she snatched my car keys off the marble table, laughing that my father had secretly transferred the title to her name that morning. They even brought my boss, Arthur, to the party to fire me publicly while I stood there in silence. They thought they were cutting off a dead limb. They didn't realize they were actually signing their own eviction notice. My name is Maya, and I am a forensic accountant who spent a decade cleaning up my family's financial crimes from the shadows. If you have ever been the invisible pillar who kept your family afloat while being treated like a burden, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community. I am about to tell you how I turned the worst night of my life into the most profitable transaction I ever made. Everything stayed silent for a long moment. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just looked at the jagged edges of my framed certificate on the floor, and then back at my father's face. Jeffrey looked back at me with a smirk that was both arrogant and hollow. Behind him, the 136 relatives and business partners I had spent years protecting with my silence were now whispering and snickering. Cynthia, my mother, was smoothing out her silk dress as if she had just performed a heroic act of domestic discipline. I felt the weight of the room shifting, the air thickening with their collective disdain. For 34 years, I had been the fix-it girl. I worked 90-hour weeks so Jeffrey could play the part of a real estate tycoon. I drafted the compliance reports that kept Arthur out of federal prison. I looked at my boss and saw him avoiding my gaze, clinking glasses with my father, celebrating the fact that he wouldn't have to pay my salary anymore. It's a strange thing to realize that you are the only adult in a room full of children wearing designer clothes. I took a deep breath. And for the first time in my life, the anger wasn't loud. It was clinical. It was a balance sheet that finally needed to be closed. I looked at the invoice in my hand. $1,100,000. Jeffrey had even charged me for the gas he used to drive me to kindergarten. It was a joke, but he wasn't laughing. He actually thought he had leverage. He thought that because he had given me life, he owned my future. I looked at Brianna, who was twirling my car keys around her finger like a trophy. She had spent the last 3 years living off the dividends I had personally secured for her, yet she looked at me like I was a stain on the carpet. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my honor. I simply nodded politely. I told them I understood perfectly. I said that if they wanted a clean break, they would get one. I walked toward the massive oak doors of the Hamptons estate without looking back. As I stepped onto the porch, the heavy thud of the door closing behind me felt like a gavel. The rain began to fall, cold and relentless, soaking through my professional suit within seconds. I didn't have a car anymore. I didn't have a job. And according to that piece of paper in my pocket, I didn't have a family. But as I walked down the long, winding driveway toward the main road to wait for a bus, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in a decade. They thought they were destroying me. They thought they were throwing me to the wolves. They didn't realize that I was the one who had been feeding the pack. I sat on that bus for 45 minutes, listening to the hum of the engine and the rain drumming against the glass. For 10 years, I had been the invisible engine of the Vance family. I was the one who woke up at 4 in the morning to balance the books while my mother was still sleeping off her third martini. I was the one who personally audited every real estate deal Jeffrey closed, fixing the errors that would have landed him in front of a grand jury years ago. I had been the silent investor in their version of a perfect life, footing the bill for a lifestyle they hadn't actually earned. When I finally reached my apartment in the city, a place they didn't even know existed, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to my home office. I opened the file titled Family Support. It wasn't just a spreadsheet. It was a record of my own servitude. I looked at the numbers and felt a sharp, analytical clarity. My compassion had been a luxury they'd overdrafted for years. And tonight, the account was closed. I scrolled through the automated payments I had set up from my private accounts. $6,000 a month for the landscaping, $12,000 for the premium health insurance policies that covered my parents' and Brianna's wellness retreats. The property taxes, the country club dues, the secondary mortgage, all of it was linked to my credit. Jeffrey thought his real estate ventures were profitable. But the truth was, his properties hadn't cleared a profit since 2018. He was playing a game of musical chairs with money, and I was the one providing the music. I remembered when Jeffrey was about to lose his primary operating license due to a massive debt ratio. I stayed up for 72 hours straight, restructuring his entire portfolio and using my own savings as a secret guarantee to satisfy the bank. When I told him the license was safe, he didn't even look up from his golf magazine. He just said, "That's what we pay you for, Maya." But he wasn't paying me. I was paying him for the privilege of being his daughter. I reached for my mouse. The cursor hovered over the master deactivate button on the family office server. I clicked. One by one, the status lights on my screen turned from green to a terminal red. Landscaping, insurance, club memberships, all gone. I accessed the mortgage portal for the Hamptons estate and submitted a formal request for the immediate removal of my name as a guarantor. I leaned back, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. Jeffrey wanted me out of the family? He got his wish. But he forgot the most basic rule of business. You can't fire the bank and still expect the ATM to work. My phone started to vibrate on the desk. Dad. I didn't answer. I just watched it until the screen went dark. The arrogance of a bully is a fragile thing. By the next morning, my family and Arthur were still draped in the delusion of their own power. Brianna was the first to broadcast her own downfall. At 10 o'clock sharp, she posted a reel titled "Unboxing My New Birthday Gift." In the video, she was twirling around my Audi A8, tagging me in a final, digital twist of the knife. I didn't report the post. I just sent a single text to the leasing company's recovery department. Asset misappropriation confirmed. Vehicle is at the following coordinates. Immobilize now. By 11. My mother sent a voice note that sounded like it had been recorded through a veil of gin. Maya. You've created a real mess. The country club just called, saying our membership is under review. Fix it immediately. Don't be a child. Then came Brandon, the lawyer of the family. He sent an email claiming they were initiating a forensic audit of the family trust. I actually laughed. They still didn't understand that there was no their money. There was only my credit. I opened my contact list and dialed a specialist. It's Maya, I said. I'm invoking the scorched earth protocol. Pull every guarantee, revoke every license, and accelerate every debt. No grace periods. No exceptions. It was 11:51 in the morning. Exactly 36 hours since they had handed me that invoice. The legacy was officially on life support, and I had just pulled the plug. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Arthur had finally tried to log in. I could almost see him find his entire screen was a sea of red. Critical error. System license expired. Arthur thought he was firing a moral liability, but he was actually firing the only person who held the encryption keys to his firm's survival. 10 minutes later, Brandon called, sounding panicked. Maya, Arthur's system is down. He's losing millions. This is sabotage. I'm an accountant, Brandon, I said. The software license is revocable at will upon my termination. This isn't sabotage. It's an expiration. I hung up and told my attorney, David, that it was time to drop the legal trap. Jeffrey and Brandon didn't realize they just triggered the reversion clause in Eleanor's will. My grandmother wrote a specific moral clause. If any direct descendant was unjustly exiled from the family unit, the ownership of the property would immediately revert to that descendant. By forcing me to sign that disownment paper, they had legally handed me the deed to the house. I officially withdrew my status as a guarantor for Jeffrey's $10 million mortgage. Without my collateral, the bank sent a formal notice of acceleration. They had 24 hours to produce $10 million or face immediate foreclosure. My phone buzzed with a text from Brianna. It was a photo of a tow truck hooking up the Audi A8 in the middle of a busy street. Maya, you psycho. Tell them to stop. I didn't reply. One by one, the Vance family's pillars were crumbling. I discovered that Jeffrey and Arthur had been running a secondary, off-books operation, using my forged digital signature to fund foundations that didn't exist. This was a criminal conspiracy. The power flip began at 9 o'clock the following morning. I sent a shadow creditor dossier to the estate. I had spent 2 years buying up Jeffrey's private debt. I didn't just want the house. I wanted his entire soul on my ledger. Jeffrey called, wheezing about a heart attack. I'm an accountant, not a cardiologist, I replied. Every second you spend acting is costing you $5,000 in late fees. Cynthia shrieked in the background as repo men arrived for the art collection. Brandon called to say he was fired and ruined because he couldn't read a simple reversion clause. I called Jeffrey one last time. I'm sending over a document. You sign over the remaining equity in Vance Development and the deed to the Hamptons property. In exchange, I won't hand the file about the forged signatures to the FBI. You'll be broke, Jeffrey, but you won't be in a jumpsuit. He signed the papers. The account was finally balanced. At exactly 12 noon, the heavy oak doors were sealed by the law. Jeffrey tried to steal silver candelabras, but the sheriff stopped him. Cynthia tried to smuggle out Fabergé eggs in her fur coats, but a deputy confiscated them. The most satisfying moment was the silence. My family was alone in a house that had become a cage. They gathered on the porch with plastic trash bags as the sheriff pulled the double doors shut. 6 months later, my life is quiet. I moved into a new office in Manhattan. The Hamptons estate is now the Eleanor Vance Center, a nonprofit that provides financial literacy and legal aid to women. I recently drove past a diner in Queens and saw Brianna scrubbing a table. She saw my car, but then looked back down at her dirty rag. Family isn't about the blood in your veins. It's about the respect in your actions. I've deleted the spreadsheets. I've closed the accounts. The debt is paid in full. And for the first time in 34 years, I don't owe anyone a single second of my life. If this story reminded you to never let anyone define your worth based on your utility, hit like and subscribe. Don't ever let your compassion become a luxury for someone else to overdraft. All right. Before you click away, let's pause for a second. Because I know exactly what you are screaming at the screen right now. Why did she tolerate that for so long? Why didn't she walk away years earlier? Why did she keep supporting people who clearly didn't respect her? Those reactions are completely normal. But the truth is, what you just watched is not really about money. It is about psychology. And specifically, something behavioral psychologists call the slot machine effect. Think about a casino slot machine. You do not win every time. In fact, you lose most of the time. But occasionally, just occasionally, you get a small payout. That tiny reward keeps you pulling the lever again and again. Toxic families often operate the same way. Most of the time, there is criticism, manipulation, or emotional neglect. But every once in a while, they give you a small moment of approval, a compliment, a thank you, a crumb of affection. And those crumbs create hope. Hope keeps people invested. So when Maya kept fixing the books, covering the debts, and protecting the family business, it was not because she was naive. It was because she had been conditioned to believe that if she just worked harder, eventually the respect would come. Now, let's talk about the financial side. Because this story is actually a masterclass in self-defense. Look closely at what she did. First, she documented everything. When she opened that file labeled family support and reviewed every payment, insurance, landscaping, mortgages, that was not just bookkeeping. That was what I call building the case. If you are financially entangled with people who exploit you, documentation becomes your shield. Second, notice her move when she canceled the guarantees and credit lines tied to the family estate. That is the audit strategy. Abusive systems survive on vagueness. The moment someone demands clear numbers, clear contracts, and clear liabilities, the illusion collapses. Scammers and manipulators hate details. Third, and this is the move most people miss, she executed what professionals call the buyout. When she offered Jeffrey a deal sign over the property and business equity in exchange for silence about the forged signatures, that was not revenge. That was a negotiation. She converted emotional chaos into a structured transaction. She did not fight emotionally. She closed the ledger. And that leads to the real verdict of this story. Your value is not measured by how useful you are to people who refuse to respect you. If someone only values you when you are solving their problems, that is not family. That is unpaid labor disguised as loyalty. So here is my question for you. Have you ever been the invisible engine holding everything together while everyone else took the credit? If this story hit close to home, share your experience in the comments. You might help someone else recognize the pattern earlier than Maya did. And if you want more breakdowns like this, real stories analyzed through psychology and financial survival, make sure you subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply understanding the game and refusing to play it anymore.